Welcome to the inaugural Two G's and Wine podcast. I am your co-host, Gregg Brown.
And I am Greg Brown, similar not only in name, but also in looks and in what we actually do. Welcome to Two G's and Wine.
Welcome. So let's get that elephant out of the room straight away. I, a number of months ago, started a boutique AI agency for adoption. And a lot of my strategy is based on actually being in person, boots on the ground type approaches to this. And one of the challenges that I've had in this has been the idea that I need to somehow duplicate myself. So imagine my reaction when I went on LinkedIn about 2 months ago and I saw someone who not only looked like me and not only did the same thing that I do, but even had the same name.
That is quite remarkable, I agree. And when you actually reached out to me on LinkedIn, I was like, oh, who's this? Is this what's going on here? There's someone with a very similar name to me. And then I obviously went to look at your profile and I'm like, oh, wow, Greg does a lot of similar things to what I do, also around AI adoption, AI thought leadership, AI strategy. And then, you wrote to me and I wrote back and we're like, oh, well, let's have a chat. And then lo and behold, we actually like each other and seem to get on like a house on fire, as the saying goes. So I think it's a start of a beautiful partnership.
Exactly. And yes, I mean, we saw the opportunity coming. I mean, being two AI guys in tech, I mean, we just thought, well, we got the same name, we do the same thing. Let's make a podcast.
So here we are, Two G's and Wine. It's our first attempt. I am slightly nervous. One of the things I do apart from AI is photography. I've literally filmed hundreds of people doing podcasts, speeches, all sorts of things, but I do not normally get on camera myself. So bit of a big moment for me.
I'm a similar kind of way. My background is in writing and journalism. So I'm normally the one giving people words to use on a podcast rather than the person who's actually on the podcast themselves. However, like we just thought, well, let's give it a go. I mean, it's enough of an interesting hook. Let's see what happens. So, over today's episode, we're going to be talking a fair bit about AI strategy and adoption. And to kick it off, I wanted to reflect again on this whole journey that I've been on over the past few months, getting my little agency working and set up. And right at the start of that, when I started posting on LinkedIn, writing blogs, this sort of thing, I had someone connect with me and they shared a book called Loon Shots. Not moonshots, but loon shots with an L. And in this book, they basically talk about how crazy ideas then lead to kind of these world changing innovations and that whole process by which this happens. So, in one of the examples that they give, they talk about Pan Am and American Airlines. And Pan Am, which was, the go-to airliner in the US for many decades, pursued what the book describes as a P-shaped loon shot, as in a product-shaped loon shot. And this, for Pan Am, meant bigger engines, faster planes, more decks for more passengers. It was always about chasing the bigger, shinier thing. However, Pan Am does not exist anymore. Well, actually, I tell a lie, it's recently come back. But it's, it previously did not exist for a period. For a time, it was an ex-airliner. And one of the reasons that it no longer exists is because of the success of American Airlines, which pursued an S-shaped strategy, or S-shaped loon shot, I should say, the S being for strategy. And its strategy, which it has now hardened into how it approaches things, began with frequent air flyer miles. So, if I should say frequent air miles. Is it frequent airline? Well, maybe you know a bit more about it.
I think it's I mean air miles. I mean frequent flyer air miles, something like this. I mean I know because Swiss Airlines and the Star Alliance they have something similar to this modern day stuff. It's basically a gamification of the more you fly, the better your status becomes. And guess what? You get to get on the plane before other people. You get to go through security a bit faster than others. If there's an upgrade available, you might just get it. I mean, Pan Am, I think, from what you were saying there, Greg, was very much like keeping up with the Joneses. I need a better car than what the other guy has. Oh, I need a bigger house than them. I need better dog, better whatever it might be, a fancier wife. So there's a whole range of things, and I think the strategy, or the loon shot strategy that American Airlines was following was, how do we bind customers to us rather than just saying, oh look, it's shiny. And I think,
Yes,
yeah, that's an AI topic too. How do we get, away from the shininess of everything that is AI?
and that's exactly what's been on my mind recently, Greg. It's essentially, I've now come to the conclusion that AI is not a P-shaped loon shot at all. It's an S-shaped one. It's not about product, it's about strategy. And I understand why you may think it is a product shaped loon shot to begin with. I mean, when you look at what the labs are making, these are very much products, the models, and how they are applied. But when we as consumers buy those models, we're not really building products. You look at kind of how people are building with AI at the moment, and it's like building on quicksand. You've got the wrappers, all this API and RPA, sticky tape nonsense. You've got people who are developing loads of little tools using called Cowork and Code and Codex and so forth. But the actual sort of foundations upon which they sit are all basically still that product from the labs. So to differentiate ourselves, or to create sovereignty, for example, we need to move away from thinking of it as a product, but more as a strategy. How does that resonate with you, Greg?
I agree fully. I mean, one of the things that many people ask me when I'm out at an event or speaking, around thought leadership around the AI is, so what tools do you use? And I'm like, well, which is your favorite AI? It's like, well, it's not that simple. It's very much, what are you trying to do? And then once we've worked out what it is that you actually want to do with AI, then we can go down the path of working out which tools are the best things for what it is that you're trying to do. You know, it's just a vast area out there, and just saying, oh, I'm going to get Copilot licenses because it came with my M365 Office license, is not necessarily the best way to approach this. That's my feelings on the topic.
Yeah, and I totally hear you on that. I every time that I come on LinkedIn at the moment, I see people pontificating about AI adoption. And in fact, we had an AI adoption conference summit here in the UK the past couple of weeks. The Chancellor of the Exchequer spoke, as did a couple of other politicians who are operating in this space. Now, I didn't get an invite. Obviously, that must have been, it must have been lost in the mail or something, Greg. But I did read these speeches in full after they'd happened, and the way that we're setting this out over here in the UK is we're kind of thinking about adoption as in, bums on seats. Has a company adopted AI? Looks like they bought some Copilot licenses. Great. We're also thinking about AI adoption as in, kind of the infrastructure that is required for AI to work. But when you look at the feedback coming from CEOs and other leaders, many of them are sort of pointing towards skills as the big gap in their ability to meaningfully execute on adoption. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, well, it's because you're pursuing it as a product. You're trying to get IT guys to lead this because you think it's a product, you think it's software, you think it's a tool. But I think the correct lens to be looking at this with is more, this is a strategy. This is an intelligence to be applied. And to get that intelligence applied, you need people to do it. You need skilled pilots. You need people who can see the problems that you are trying to fix within your organization with AI and can understand the opportunities that AI present and have sufficient literacy and fluency to be able to develop those and implement. For me, that's really the big differentiator between the two. It's that, when we perceive this as a tool, when we perceive this as a product, that's all it will ever be. But when we perceive AI, which reacts to us very much like a mirror, like the intent and how we frame AI massively impact the outcomes that we see. So when we frame it as a strategy, as something that can take that anxiety and turn it into agency, it changes the entire game. Is that something you've seen on your end?
Well, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I was talking to the chap who runs Google in the Nordics for AI and things like this, and he was telling me about their latest adoption paper that they just published. Lots of companies have got Gemini because, same sort of thing. You've got a Google license, you get Gemini included to some extent. And but not only that, but real companies have actually bought licenses, things like this. And he was saying that 88% of these companies say they have no idea what they're really doing with it. They've just got it. And this is published in an actual, overview publication thing. And less than 20% of the companies are doing anything transformative with their AI. And this, I think, illustrates perfectly your AI literacy discussion there. Just having the license is not going to help you. If your people don't know what they're trying to do and how to do it, and the best ways of going about it, they're not going to be successful. And if you, like most things in life, if you try something new and you're no good at it, very few people have the guts to then really stick with it and get better at it. Most will be like, oh, well, it's not really for me, and I'm quicker doing it myself anyway. And, last time I asked you the question, it gave me a random answer. And it's the whole infrastructure. How do you deal with AI? Do you understand what AI is? I was doing machine learning for video games over 20 years ago. And that is AI in the broader sense of the word. So I think I'm fairly well positioned to say what is AI capable of. And we're not dealing with a sentient being here. You're dealing with pattern matching and mirroring what you're asking, kind of thing. If you say, "Is this a great idea?" most likely it'll say yes. You say, "Is this a horrible idea?" It's like, "Oh, well, maybe yes, maybe no. It's probably not good because of so on." And it's a lot. How do you train your people to use it? Are you just going for the sycophancy of everyone says, "Oh, it's a great job. I'm doing wonderful ideas. I've got the best ever strategy," and everything flops after they've done the work with ChatGPT. I suppose that answers what you asked there to
Yeah,
some extent.
for me, a good parallel to look at is our relationship with cars. So, one of the most important innovations that we've developed with respect to road safety and cars overall has been the seatbelt. There are innovations out there that have had greater impact in improving lives, reducing accidents, that sort of thing, reducing deaths. Vaccines jump out as a particularly prominent one there, but so the seatbelt though, that is still a product play, and we're kind of we're seeing that come out of the labs. The way that we train the models to be safer, more effective, this sort of thing. and steer users away from harmful applications of AI. That's the seatbelt. But I'd argue there's been an innovation that was even more profound for road safety and for how we handle ourselves whilst we're driving around these 2-ton death machines. And that is the driving license. You're giving people the skills, the knowledge, the confidence to be able to operate this 2-ton driving machine. And it's the same thing with AI, particularly with this move from the chatbot to the agentic harness. Pre 2006, sorry, 2026. Obviously, want to be 20 years younger, Greg. But pre 2026, we were essentially flying around in prop planes with respect to AI, but no one had really been taught how to fly at that point. Now, with agentic harnesses, we've gone from the prop plane to a jet fighter, but we still don't have a good manual for that. And whilst there is obviously a lot of opportunity in the agentic harness, the more that we kind of try to frame this as a product play and think about seatbelts rather than licenses, the more we're going to have catastrophic failures that have real world impacts, because you have unskilled, untrained users who are unaware of the risks. And that risk is multidimensional. It goes across everything that AI touches. And therefore can make massive mistakes. But conversely, it's also through understanding those risks that we actually unlock the opportunities. When we actually know how AI works and the potential risk that it creates, we can navigate around that to create systems that are safer and actually drive useful applications that are beneficial to the individual and the organization.
I agree with what you're saying. I think it's a great analogy there with the driving license. I mean, but just having a driving license means you know the basics, right? There's obviously then you can do more advanced driving courses, you can learn more, things like that. Interesting, you're talking about planes and jet planes, because my dad was in the Second World War. He was a pilot, and he didn't have a license to drive a car, but he bought himself a car, went to the magistrate in South Africa and said, "Oh, I need to get a license." And the guy looked at him and said, "Oh, you're a pilot?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm a pilot." He's like, "Oh, if you can fly, you can drive. Here's your license. Have a good day." You know, I mean, this was obviously, almost 80 odd years ago now, or more than 80 years ago. So it's obviously different times, but you know, yes, you can definitely get out there, and you need to learn that there's nothing better than actually using the tools that, trying to explore yourself. There's so many help guides online. Anthropic got whole tutorials. OpenAI has lots of tutorials around how to do this, whole learning paths that you can follow. And I think it's great if people are out there doing it, but it's definitely easier if you actually sit down with teams and discuss with them what do they want to get out of the AI tools that they're using. I think that's the critical issue here. And then once they work that out, then you can take them through those steps, because now literally anyone can be a vibe coder and build a new app overnight. The big question is, once you run this through proper security protocols, how vulnerable is something like that to outside influence? And I've got friends in the cybersecurity world, CISOs. I talk at CISO events, cybersecurity events, and some of these people are proper, university level researchers, and they're like, it's so easy to jailbreak these bots and things that are out there, and poorly created stuff is going to be a plague for many companies. And one example, a friend of mine, she got a LLM support tool to not just for her, but for everyone to answer as if it were Captain Jack Sparrow. So every time someone sent a report request to this company, they'd get "Ahoy, matey," sort of responses like this, and that's not exactly the what you want to be portraying as a proper, serious, bricks and mortar kind of company, right?
Exactly, and what you were touching on there with the skills. I mean, that really kind of goes into again, the risk side of things, because without that understanding of the skills, all of your risk pretty much on AI is unmitigated. The problem is very much in seat, not on screen. It's entirely down to the skill, the intent, and the knowledge of the user. That's the fluency and literacy side of things. And this is what transforms the outcomes. Without that as well, the other thing that you mentioned there, just kind of people blundering into it. I mean, this is something that I've seen time and time again with people who come into the tools and then they assume a certain level of competency ahead of time without the expertise or experience to actually back that assertion up. There's many different ways of putting this. There's overconfidence bias, Dunning-Kruger, epistemic arrogance, but it's basically people coming in and assuming that they know how to do something. It's like, because I can put on a pair of trainers, I can win a 100-meter sprint at the Olympics, or because I can put two words together into a sentence, I am now Bill Shakespeare. That is the attitude that is given off, but people don't see it. And particularly if they do come from a technical background, they go, well, I spend all day coding and therefore I know how to do agentic coding. But if you go and look at Anthropic's recent data around this, it's actually people in a management and leadership position without any coding experience at all who are outperforming software engineers and people who work with computers and code all day in the quality and success rate of their engagements with agentic code. Whilst we're still looking to understand why there's this discrepancy, I'd say it's because people who are in those leadership positions, you see more challenges, you see kind of a greater range of opportunity, and you also have more life experience and sector-wide experience and professional, kind of professional experience that extends beyond just your specialism that you can bring to bear in your problem solving. And therefore, I should also have people who are in leadership and management situations communicate more. So they're used to giving instructions, orders, this sort of thing. You pull that together, and of course, yeah, they're going to be better than coders who spend their entire day writing code when it comes to giving instructions on how to solve problems to AI. I mean, is that something that you've seen at all on your side of the track?
I find that very interesting because, I mean, what you're basically saying is that you've got sort of almost like the key differentiator there is how the management levels interact with their employees, how they interact with decisions, the way that they act in meetings and things like this. And this is actually coming to the fore when they're doing their coding task, or they're creating whatever apps they're doing, or they're making a new GPT or skill set, whatever it might be. That's my takeaway from what you were just saying, and I think that actually resonates very well with my experience. People who are good at communicating are generally a lot better with like dealing with an LLM, because the more structured your input and the more structured you can tell the system about how the output should be, the better outputs you're going to get. Right? That's part of it. If you just sort of ramble on and fluffle about for a while, then you shouldn't be surprised you get crap back out of it, basically. Crap in, crap out. It's the whole slopocalypse that we're experiencing at the moment. People with a bit of half knowledge putting in a thing and saying, oh, make me sound super smart, and polish it for LinkedIn, and then you get 500 posts around why Claude is better than Codex today, for example. So yes, I think that's that experience of, let's say, just engineers not being able to create the best tools is very interesting, because if you look in the actual system engineering point of view, you have people who design the systems, you have people who implement the systems, you have people who review the systems, you have people who do all kinds of things. Everyone has suddenly, in terms of development, they used to have, back end engineering who was concentrating on the database in the background, all the stuff, how it worked in the back, and your front end engineers who made, they made the design at the front, but that design came from your UX people who actually did the design, gave it to them, and they converted it into how it should look, right? And now everyone's capable of being what's called a full stack engineer, saying, "Oh, this is a picture of how I'd like it to look. Please make it for me." And that's all you need, and off the system goes and does more or less everything that you need to make it work, right?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it really just comes down to communication. And when you think about kind of the skill sets and expertise of the average sort of machine learning chief or IT chief, and I don't mean this in a diminishing or trying to target technical skills here or anything like that. I don't mean to be mean. Lots of my best mates are in machine learning and IT, and it would be pretty awkward if I went after them. But what you do tend to see is that these skills are not areas where you expect to see strong communication skills or people skills. I mean, what does someone who codes do all day? They don't really communicate with others. They're not really sort of, seeing a wide variety of different problems. They've been given a specific thing to do by someone above them, and they spend all day writing code for that. Now,
And
that's,
they'll even go and sit in the corner and hope to be left alone by every other person just to be able to get that task done, right? I mean,
yeah, well, I mean, writers do that
speaking from my own
too.
experience.
But the difference between someone who's writing prose and writing code is very technical, very sort of specific. You make a mistake in code, you're going to spend your entire editing period trying to find that mistake. You do it in prose, people think, oh, he probably did that intentionally. Let's give him a Nobel Prize or something. But it's the big difference here, though, is when you consider, okay, well, what is machine learning? What is IT? What underpins that? It's data and analytics in both cases. And whilst LLMs are born from machine learning, the data that underpins them is wildly different to what you see in other places, because the data which underpins them, as the second L points out, is the English language. It's it's human knowledge. It's kind of everything that we've ever learned, and all the mistakes that are still recorded in human knowledge. Um, that's what it's drawing from. So, to be able to interact with that, it's not a coding task, it's a language task, it's a social sciences and humanities thing. So, by being an effective communicator and an effective orchestrator, that is going to improve the outcomes of what you're getting from codex or code, or indeed just your chat.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think a large amount of this is based on, you've suddenly got a tool that is what's called a mixture of experts, right? You've got literally billions of the smartest people in the world have knowingly or unknowingly contributed to an LLM, based on what it's trained on. And you can ask it any question. You can ask it for a pancake recipe. You can ask it, why does the moon rise and things like this, and how do tides work? And it'll give you answers in ways that you can understand them. If my daughter, my almost 11-year-old daughter, asks me questions, a lot of the time I know it because I do a lot of reading, a lot of general knowledge, but there are obviously things I don't know. I'm going, well, let's discover it. In the old days, you'd go on Uncle Google and you'd type in your question, and you'd either find it or you wouldn't. Now the LLM will give you an answer of some kind. The big question here then is, of course, is this answer trustable? Is it actually a real answer, or is it just saying in complete confidence, complete nonsense? And I think that's something, that one also needs to be aware of. And maybe, it's something to do also with how these LLMs and things are being built and who's actually doing the building, sort of maybe getting in towards engineering monoculture stuff, like.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing up the engineering monoculture. I think it's really important when we're thinking about the narrative side of all of this. Obviously, the narrative, the intent, and everything matters from your side of things when you're interacting with AI. But one of the things that I'm increasingly concerned about is this. Well, I was going to say emergence, but it's very much locked in at this point of the engineering monoculture that exists within Silicon Valley and the places that it influences. This isn't to say that engineers aren't capable of amazing things, because that would be quite evidently not true. I mean, the tools themselves, intelligences, platforms, this has all been made possible by the engineer's mindset. But what I'm deeply concerned about is that at the top of each of the labs, the people advising the people at the top of the labs, the sort of the mindset of people throughout the labs, and then kind of how it then influences the startup scene and the culture around it, is that because you have this monoculture, it doesn't have the relevant inputs from other ways of thinking, which you need to have to be able for this to be effective. So I'll give you an example. Thinking about the way that we're doing adoption again. At the moment, well, a couple of months ago, I went to Microsoft's AI tour here in London, and at this point in time, I think it was fair to say that Copilot was the worst option available for enterprises here. Not in terms of safety, which obviously it does a great job on that front, but in terms of the actual results that you can get out of it, the applicability of it. And if you are unfortunate enough to be a Copilot organization, it's quite likely that you've already encountered Microsoft's masterclass. And the engineering monoculture would say that this is a product play, and therefore the people to explain it would be IT guys. So if you go along to the Microsoft masterclass, what you're likely to get, some guy dialing in with a PowerPoint. In the experience that I had a C-suite team on the phone. These guys had never prompted before. And this IT chap went from here's Copilot to here's Copilot Studio and all the agentic stuff within about 2 to 3 minutes. There was no story. There was no sort of get your hands on the technology. There was no Q&A. It was, from 0 to 60 in no time at all, with no explanation of how you apply these things or why they're actually useful. Just kind of like, here's some bullet points about stuff that's actually, in the Microsoft Copilot ecosystem. And then when Satya Nadella came out at this AI tour, I was expecting something where he goes, okay, we can see that Copilot's not performing in a way that we hoped, so this is our strategy to move forward. And we did get that, but it was 20 new tools. It was another range of features. And this is the engineering monoculture. We can fix everything by crowbarring in more features. We don't need marketing teams. We have GTM, and the other big frustration that I have with this is the concept of the forward deployed engineer as well, where you have, the concept on paper is great. I'm very much boots on the ground myself, and I think that's the only way to do AI effectively. But for all the reasons that I've already listed, kind of the lack of kind of exposure to different ways of thinking, the lack of exposure to different professions, the complete lack of understanding of how organizations actually work, and most fundamentally, nothing within the skill set to actually remedy the real barrier to AI adoption, which is people-shaped problems. So the concept is correct, but slapping engineer on it, as the engineering monoculture does to just about everything, and sending in an engineer to do a leader's job is the worst possible outcome you could reach for.
Interesting. I mean, yes, I agree. I agree around many of the things you were saying there. I mean, I think, just having your co-pilot license is nice, but it's not going to solve the problem because every company, even if it's in the same sort of business area, is going to be having its own unique challenges. It's got differentiators that make it different from the competitors, right? And these things are just often overlooked by any kind of engineer, because they don't know about go to market, they don't know about marketing, they don't know about all these things. And like you were saying, Copilot, well, a whole lot of new tools, guys. Off you go, have fun. And this is a case of trying to run before you can walk or even crawl, right? And trying to go in a sprint when you've literally just learned how to stand up as a small kid is probably not the best idea because you're going to fall flat on your face. And happens with many people who are adopting AI into their companies. They've got their license from somewhere, someone. The CEO says we need AI, then the CTO is like, yes, yes, we do. I will order licenses, and then you're like, oh, which licenses? And then suddenly they have licenses, and as you're saying, you've got your co-pilot licenses and people who've been, maybe a bit more advanced. They've been trying in their own time. They're like, oh yeah, well, I've got OpenAI, I've got ChatGPT. I'm just going to bang my stuff into GPT because it does my solution way better than Copilot does for me. I don't have enough powers on Copilot. But suddenly you're dealing with a whole lot of shadow AI tools out there, and I've dealt with pharmaceutical companies like, yeah, let's take our entire customer database and all the tests and just pump them into ChatGPT, and it will tell us all the connections and all the things that would make massive new discoveries. I'm like, no, you can't do that. Not just because physically it doesn't make any sense, but you've got the whole privacy, you've got the whole things around it, your AI acts, you've got all sorts of stuff apart from the physical impossibility of just dumping it and hoping for the best you know, and that's then obviously where an AI forward deployed engineer would be useful because they would say, well, that's probably not the best way of handling that problem. But having said that, it matters very much how you present these things to the people who are actually going to be using.
Yeah, and that comes back to the communication point here. I mean, you need to, at least in my experience here, and I actually have the receipts and the scars to back this up as well. To do adoption, you need to empower people, right?
Yeah.
And because these are the guys that understand your problems. These are the guys who can explain to an engineer, kind of how we might be able to develop it. But you need an engineer who's going to understand them first. But it's also, yeah, when you're thinking about this from the top down, you got to be thinking, okay, so how do I get that sort of grassroots innovation and turn it into something? And with that, it's about giving people an AI shaped crowbar, going, just go at your problems. We support you. We'll give you the resources, the guidance, the mentorship, the training, the tools, whatever it is that you need to resolve this. And then we'll put in the structures in place to be able to to harness that grassroots innovation and turn it into, procedures, policies, and ways of approaching things across the business, which is fit for purpose in the age of AI. But to be able to get people to do that, you need to raise that literacy, you need to raise that fluency. So when you actually sit down to figure out, okay, how do we govern this? What's the strategy here? How do we do adoption? People around the table actually understand what you're talking about. The other thing that's really not useful about the engineering monoculture is that it leads people to be pigeonholed as either technical or non-technical. But the actual difference in 2026 is practitioner versus non-practitioner of AI. You can pick up technical skills like that with AI, and that's something you know how to do as a practitioner. You know how to become a T-shaped generalist who can bring all this different expertise and knowledge and people together to be able to create these solutions. But if you're a non-practitioner, even if you're technical, you do not understand the wider picture and how to do this. So to be able to have the conversations that you need to have with people across your organization to do adoption, everyone needs to be on the same page. And that means raising the bar for everybody. It's like, if you bought a bunch of computers back in the 90s, the person who's not using a computer and is still on pen and paper, they're your new bottleneck. And you will not be able to explain to them why computers are great and why you need to change things about the job if they're not using a computer. This is a platform technology, not a software. And therefore, if you want to get the use out of it and therefore, be able to govern it, be able to bring it in successfully, you need a rising tide that raises all boats.
Yeah, so I mean, just to recap a little bit what you were saying, basically, AI adoption, the bottleneck is not necessarily the number of AI tools you have. It's literally people knowing how to use those tools. That's one of the main things that I took from what you were just saying there, Greg. And it actually made me think of something when I was running US sales for Frontify, which is a brand management company, it's a SaaS company about 10 years ago almost. Some of our best innovations did not come from our engineering department. It came literally from customer needs and customer pain points. Customers coming and saying, hey, we have this problem. How do we solve it? And I think that is something that is also really applicable to AI. Like you were saying a bit earlier about, the Microsoft Masterclass or the Copilot Masterclass. Same goes for any other of these masterclass. They go in, they've got their set script, they go through that, they read it to you, they tell you about it, they show you some cute slides. It's the same with most AI tool demos. The demo runs super smoothly because they've done it 100 times. And as soon as you put in your own data into this, it's an absolute mess and doesn't work properly anymore. And I think that whole idea is around, your practitioner, non-practitioner that you were saying. It's technical, non-technical is not the decision maker anymore. If someone just talks about AI but have never actually built a RAG-based chatbot system, for example, that's nice. But what happens when the user starts trying to jailbreak your chatbot? It's things like this. Have you got experience with it? What happens? Are you like, oh yes, but we've got our guardrails, we've got gateways, everything's fine. And then someone who really knows what they're doing arrives, and 10 minutes later, it's talking to you in pirate. you know.
Yeah, exactly. Which kind of brings me on to an interesting question, actually, Greg. So at the moment, one of the things that I constantly see is I go on LinkedIn, and there will be people there who have a lot of things to say about AI, normally AI generated type stuff. And some of it can come across as quite convincing to a non-practitioner that's looking to understand AI. I see endless posts about governance, trust, judgment, all these sort of things. And whilst they are important components, I'd say kind of most of the posts that I read, they seem to be more just regurgitated buzz phrases. It's a power statement where they're using these words to kind of go, oh, it's judgment. That's the thing that makes the difference here. But when I actually go and look at these people, they don't have any scars or actual expertise. They haven't got boots on the ground, which for me kind of undermines their credibility. I mean, this is a job where you need to have done it to be successful at it, because if you don't understand that what you're trying to fix is people-shaped problems, it doesn't matter what strategy you bring in, it doesn't matter what tools you bring in or products or anything like that. It will be a case of the irresistible force, i.e. your mandate, against the immovable object of your colleagues who haven't been given the permission, haven't been given the knowledge, the confidence, or anything like that to be able to actually adopt these tools themselves. So this brings me to the question, how do people know whether or not what they're buying is a good strategy or good advice over what is essentially snake oil?
And I think that's that question alone could almost be an entire podcast, or the answer for it, let's say. But I mean, I have experienced really big corporations, 24,000 employees, and the AI goals that they bring out for the year are things like 30% efficiency, right? Now, this may sound great. Efficiency has always been one of those low-hanging fruits. You can automate stuff, go faster. But, you say 30% efficiency to a large workforce, and most people are going to be like, oh, gee, that's a third of us that might get the chop. I'm not even going to touch this stuff. And it's not so much about being, eventually replaced by AI. You're probably going to be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI. So so the strategy that you're looking at, is this a good strategy? Is it a bad strategy? First of all, I try and get people who've actually worked on problems that you are trying to solve. Literally, just a one size fits all might be great for baseball caps, but it's probably not the best thing for an AI implementation. And what has this company done? What areas have they worked on? Have they got experience in what you're actually looking to do? Or are they, like you said, with the mixture of experts LLM models, are they just an expert at everything? I knew people from Big Four consulting who would literally answer any question. That's one of our core competencies. That's pretty much what an LLM does these days. It answers in a similar way with complete confidence. And are you then relying on someone who's getting their ideas based on an LLM feedback to their great idea? Or are you relying on someone who's actually implemented it and has, as you say, boots on the ground, been there, done that, got the t-shirt for it, and can actually talk from their own personal experience? I don't know how you see it, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I see it in a similar sort of way. I mean, if someone starts talking about efficiency, but they're not talking about effectiveness and they're not talking about how to inspire kind of, well, maybe inspire is the wrong word here, how to retain and how to catalyze passion or, meaning in the workplace, purpose. Then they probably haven't done this successfully. So a little example here from my own work. I used to be a communications guy, and when I first started messing around with AI, I thought, well, okay, I'm going to make the press release process a lot more efficient. I'm going to take myself out of it and just kind of go poof. And you know what? I really succeeded on that, in that I was able to take, just a back and forth with whoever needed to have some news written about them. And without even touching the keyboard, I would then receive a draft back based on the transcript that was pretty damn good, right? But the problem was I wasn't thinking about myself in that loop. I wasn't thinking about how I can be effective. I was just thinking about how I can be efficient. Worse, I was also kind of not considering my cognitive side of things. So, I am a writer first and foremost, and therefore everything that I do is built on that skill set that I have been refining for 4 decades now as my craft. So when I stopped doing that, the way that I learn things is through reading and writing. The way that I express myself and know, what I'm going to say is probably because I've written about it beforehand.
Mm.
So when I stopped writing the press releases, I'd have these embarrassing moments where my boss would go, "So what are we doing with the press releases?" And I can't even recall the topic of the press release, let alone what's in it. And then really just the chickens came home to roost when I just had a really embarrassing call with the FT, where completely mind blanked whilst talking to a journalist, um, which is definitely not what you want as a comms person. And that's what happens when you pursue the product play, the efficiency play, the system one thinking. If you're not cognitively engaged, then you're not going to be performing well in the age of AI. It's about cognitive enhancement, system two thinking, being slow and methodical, not system one. So when I see kind of people coming along and they just say, oh, it's all about efficiency, it's all about APIs and wrappers and all this sort of thing, for me, that's not someone who has credible lived experience of AI, particularly when it comes to the actual strategy and adoption side of things. It needs to be boots on the ground. It needs to be human centric. It needs to be empowering, particularly as we have harnesses coming through where, that the whole API, RPA thing is brittle. It breaks all the time. Like you say, people go 30% efficiency. I don't want anything to do with that because that means a headcount reduction. I'm going to sabotage it. And this happens time and time again. And it's also at those companies that you see the stats that you mentioned earlier. So I haven't read the report that you mentioned, but I have read a similar one by Amazon, and they were saying around mid 70% of UK companies have adopted AI. But that adoption is we have a co-pilot license. And they say only around 22%, I think it is off the top of my head, are advanced users of AI. But then that advanced use case, agentic coding, APIs, all this sort of thing, to be in that bracket, one person needs to send one prompt to Codex, and now you're an advanced user. For me, that's not advanced use, right? Again, that's just product. And you've counted someone using the product, good. But how do you actually make people use the product? How do you communicate the strategic advantage? How do you get fingers on keyboards, people speaking to Whisper, whatever it is, and actually creating things that are beneficial for an organization? That's all people-shaped problems. It's all cognitive, and that starts with not just kind of looking at the efficiency use cases where you could go, okay, all this meaningless performative bullshit, let's get rid of that, or at least automate it. So, that's great, but it's about that effectiveness. How do you get people to go, okay, well, I'm a writer or whatever the job is. That's what I get out of bed for. How can I use AI to be a more effective writer? So, get better research, get better places and leads for where you could publish it. Stress testing the ideas that you put forward before you publish them, this sort of thing. And it really, really, really just gets to one of the big things that I say about AI, which is around this idea of an AI dividend, where if you're just counting efficiency, you're not going to see ROI. And even if you're looking at effectiveness, ROI can be really hard to achieve. But through that effectiveness, through the efficiency combined and keeping people in sync so they're actually using the tools, you can go, okay, well, we can see that we're saving this amount of time. We can see that we're getting outsized results and these kind of one-offs, like we don't have to use McKinsey anymore or something like that. What that all then points to is the AI dividend. So that's the bit that you can actually track. And that AI dividend is, how is AI helping us execute on our overall strategy? So, for example, you're trying to you're trying to sell some sort of lab-based equipment across the world. And you're thinking, okay, I need to figure out how we can do more of this. What are the different levers that I could pull to make that happen? And you go, all right, well, one of the most effective and well-evidenced ways of increasing productivity is to reduce stress and burnout. So we're going to move to a 4-day working week. That's the AI dividend. So you can track the actual impact of AI by the fact that you are now able to do a 4-day work week. And therefore your people are going to be happier, and therefore they're going to be more productive. Morale goes up, and you get greater results. That's what you need to be focusing on, not how fast the engine spins, but where you're driving.
Yeah, and when you're getting there, right? Like on any trip, in the end, it's about how long am I going to take to actually get there, and what is the path that I'm following to get to that destination, right? And it's not just about going as fast as you can, breaking all the speed limits, getting pulled over, losing your license, and basically making a mess of everything. And I think just to go back on what you were saying there, people really understanding what they're doing. It's not just about the ROI, your return on your investment. It's about measurable things, and saving time by summarizing emails does not help you in the overall running of your business, because you will miss the important things. You'll be in a meeting a week later and someone asks you a question about an email that they sent you that you probably didn't respond to properly, and you'll be like, well, I have no idea. And that's then you're doing a cognitive offload because you're now using AI for productivity, but other people are paying the price for it. You're quicker, but everyone else now takes 2 to 3 times as long to get a proper answer out of you. That's then the other side of that coin, right? The flip side there. So how, just to rephrase your question, how does a leader actually know they're getting the good strategy? You got like 2 sentences to explain this to me, Greg.
I think you should get that person to enable you if you're a leader. And if by the end of that session you can go, I now have a good understanding of AI and I have the confidence to proceed, they know what they're talking about. Like an enablement session, in my experience, you can front load that with kind of the penny drop moments that get people to reframe AI to something that is actually beneficial to. So, one of the ways that I start mine is I talk about your anxieties. And then I flip those anxieties around into agency by getting you to go hands on with the prompt. There's no PowerPoints or anything like that, just getting you hands on, and then I'll get you to prompt the use case prompt, which is I am X, I do Y at organization Z. Work with me back and forth to find effective and efficient use cases across my work. And what you're doing is you're putting, all the biggest pains in the ass and all the things that they want to do but never had the time directly in front of them. And then you just do one penny drop further. And when they go, well, how do I do that one? You go, well, you just ask AI, work with me back and forth, and we will, explore doing this as a use case or something. And that gets people hands on. That starts to create these reframes, like, kind of not perceiving it as a tool, but correctly identifying it as intelligence to be applied. And if the person that's doing your strategy can show you that, then they probably know enough about the wider side of AI to be able to, when they're going in and talking with your staff and finding those use cases and identifying how they can scale them up, they're going to be taking in the right mindset. They're going to be thinking about effectiveness. They're going to be thinking about what keeps people engaged. They're going to be thinking that Toyota way methodology of going to the person closest to the problem and supporting them in resolving it. That's how you can find out. The other one, which is a lot more simple and straight to the point, is my new benchmark, Greg. I haven't actually told you this one yet. It's called MECHIT. It's brand new. MECHIT. It's a brand new AI benchmark for humans, and it's essentially how successfully can someone explain Mecha Hitler and why that was a terrible thing. And if they can, they probably know enough about AI to be trusted. If they can't, or they just fumble through it, or they start talking about how Elon Musk is a great guy, don't go there. Let your competitor, pick that person up.
Fair enough. That was slightly more than 2 sentences, but I think you really conveyed the idea very, very well. Someone who can actually enable your team to understand how an LLM or an AI tool works and how it can improve their life is the kind of person or company that you want to hire to help you with your strategy.
Exactly.
My whine for this particular episode of our podcast. The other day we were talking, and you were saying you'd heard, I can't remember from which company, but they'd done a presentation, and you said it was basically a guy talking about AI, reading from an AI generated script with AI generated slides, and you called him
A slop puppet.
exactly a slop puppet. That's maybe our wine of the week.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely been. We should definitely close with wines of the week, I think, in future. But yeah, slop puppet. So this is someone who they're essentially using AI to do all their communications for them, but lack the fluency and literacy skills to understand, what a basic AI tell is. Um, and what made this particularly galling is this was a senior person at one of the big labs I was on a call with, in charge of a major project. You will definitely recognize the name of the lab because it's one of the two that's always in the news. And they just came out and, they might as well have started it with "You're absolutely correct." It was like reading an output from Claude, with no instructions, no sort of gearing, haiku level, low thinking type stuff. It was just, you could take their entire talk and then put it into your instructions and go, avoid this in future, and you would create perfect content that would just be, it would have none of the slop sort of tells in it. And for me, like, I found that really disappointing. When you've got someone who, again, it's the engineering monoculture, right? Who, they assume that they're actually going to be proficient, but when it's put into action, kind of just I mean, it it put me off wanting to work with that company. That was how bad it was. So, you kind of like look up at these organizations, and then when you see that they themselves have terrible AI fluency literacy skills, you kind of go, okay, that's a problem, and I'm just well clear of that.
I
Have you
mean,
seen any
I mean,
puppetry recently, Greg?
I mean, I'm just going to say that it does not surprise me hearing that the big ones like OpenAI or Anthropic are actually hiring proper marketing experts and copywriters because and paying them a fortune, because I think this is a problem that AI first and everything is not necessarily always your absolute best bet. You know.
Very true. Very true. All right. That, I think, brings us to the end of our first podcast, Greg. So,
I think it does, Greg.
I think this has been fun. And, for those of you who have been following along, thanks for sticking with us. This is our first one, so it is rough and ready. But we do want to carry on doing these. So, hit
We
subscribe,
do
do
indeed.
follow. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you at the next one. And, as with AI, it's all about reps, 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 continuous improvement, getting better every time. Next week, I'm sure we will be, pretty much up there with the top podcasts in the
Well,
world.
that's not going to be hard. We're gonna
Oh,
use Claude. We're gonna use Claude to write our scripts, right?
yeah, and I'm going to come on here and talk about how I sniffed a sort of shot of whiskey last week and I'm still suffering, or something like that, But yes,
Sounds
but
great,
it's been
Greg.
an absolute pleasure.
And I'd say our listeners and viewers should also, if they've got questions that they'd like us to address on any of their, let's say, pet topics around AI, they should just let us know, and we can also address those in one of our next podcasts, right?
Absolutely. And we're also planning to start expanding the podcast to some of our friends and acquaintances that we've been meeting along this weird and wonderful journey that Greg and myself are both on. So hopefully next week we will be talking about leadership and talking about how senior executives can use AI to, not just in terms of thinking about AI strategy, but to support their work overall in terms of communication. We'll be getting one of our friends on to talk about that, who's developed an app for this specific purpose. But in the meantime, do drop us any questions, any comments, and say whether we did a good or a bad job. And if it's the latter, we will accept abuse. But if you could also provide some critical feedback with it, so we can improve, that would be much
Constructive
appreciated.
criticism is always welcomed. It's not really great to have, but to be criticized, but it's better if it's constructive and they actually tell us what we can do better, right?
I think we're thick-skinned enough to take it, Greg, and also there's two of us. We can go and beat them up.
Yeah, exactly. We're both big guys. All right, Greg. It was lovely doing this with you. Looking forward to the next one.
Likewise, Greg, and see you all another time.
Bye, everyone.